Hello, my name is Rob Edwards, welcome back to my YouTube channel, and today I'm going to be starting a series of videos which answer a question which I get asked all the time whenever I do interviews about any of my writing. For example, The Ascension Machine, my novel, which I'm definitely not here to advertise. What are my influences? What has inspired my writing? Over the next few months, once a month, I'm going to do a video talking about one of the books or movies or TV shows, or in this case, comic book series, which have inspired me and my writing. Today I'm going to take a look at DC Comics' Legion of Superheroes. It is a series which probably has the most direct link from source material to my inspiration. You can probably see the line straight away. The book is set 1,000 years into DC's future, and the Legion is a diverse group of young heroes who've come together to protect the United Planets and the galaxy at large from all manner of threats. I mean, I say diverse. I'd have to acknowledge it is embarrassing and slightly awkward to look back on, but during certainly the early days of the Legion, and possibly some of the more recent stuff as well, a lot of aliens from across the galaxy look a lot like white people, which I'm not super happy about. It is kind of awkward, but there we go. It is what it is. They are trying to fix it in modern iterations anyway. That much I can say. The Legion started life in 1958 as a guest appearance in Adventure Comics issue 247, where three Legionnaires, Cosmic Boy, Saturn Girl and Lightning Lad, come back to modern-day Smallville and meet and recruit Superboy to join the Legion. They have a very strange way of recruiting Superboy, in that they spend most of the story trying to convince him that he's not worthy of joining the Legion of Superheroes. I guess this sort of prank is what passes for humour in the 30th century. But by the end, all of these confusions are resolved, and Superboy is granted an honorary membership in the Legion. Now, it's an honorary membership because at the time, I don't think the Legion was intended to be an ongoing thing. But the idea proved quite popular, and it wasn't long before the Legion came back and eventually became a mainstay of Adventure Comics and Superboy stories. The fact that the Legion was popular back then did not necessarily mean that it was good. It relied an awful lot on sort of science fiction-y tropes of the time, of the 50s and 60s, and while it was weird and wonderful to look at, you look back at some of the crazy stuff that they drew in the 50s and 60s in Legion comic books, the storytelling wasn't terribly original. There was a lot of tropey stuff. There was a lot of mind controls and sinister alien plots and being imprisoned on the planet Zog and that kind of thing. And it's what inspired the young comic book writer Jim Shooter to pitch a story to DC for the Legion of Superheroes. DC liked it so much they commissioned that story and two more from him. At the time, Jim Shooter was 13 years old. This is not something that would happen in modern day comic book industry, alas. But back then it was apparently something that could happen. Jim Shooter changed the emphasis of the book. There was still plenty of weird and wacky science fiction stuff going on, but he began taking the direction of the book in more looking at teen angst and romances, and they were still writ large against science fiction ideas, but there was a lot more emphasis on the people and the personalities within the Legion. And that proved to be a very popular change. While Jim Shooter isn't the first big name to work on the Legion, it is probably one of the biggest names who has worked on there. But, since then, we've seen the likes of Paul Levitz, Keith Giffen, Mark Waid write for the book. We've seen artists like, Keith Giffen again, Kurt Swan, Tom McCraw. I'm forgetting dozens at this point. A lot of big names of comic book industry have worked on the title. Eventually, Superboy left the Legion, and the book went off on its own. This is about the time when I first encountered it, in fact. And the very first two-parter I think they had after the Legion of Superheroes went their own way was, I think, probably about the first issue I picked up. And it told a story of a Legion team investigating a sinister space circus with lots of alien animals on show. It was kind of crazy, but I quite enjoyed it. In fact, I really enjoyed the Legion back then, but it was actually quite hard for me to follow comic book series back in the early 80s because I had to rely on what comic books turned up in the local newsagents. And in the north of England in the early 80s, this was not something that one could rely upon. But I did love it. I loved the huge cast. I loved the fact that, the heroes had real names as well, and to really follow up with the action you had to learn both names, and that was terribly confusing at first but really satisfying once you'd gone through it. I loved the crazy capers they would have, and I loved the emphasis on the relationship stuff. I shipped, I believe the modern vernacular would have it, I shipped Ultra Boy and Phantom Girl before shipping was a thing. They were my OTP. I am too old and white-haired to be using such words, never mind. So I lost track of the Legion in the 80s, which is a shame because a lot of the classic stories of the Legion occurred about then. Things like the Universo story, Magic Wars, and of course, arguably the greatest Legion of Superhero story in history, the Great Darkness Saga. The Great Darkness Saga, it's a must-read for anyone who has any interest at all in the Legion of Superheroes. It was a big multi-month spanning storyline. Before that was really a thing. It was a mystery. It pulled on a lot of Legion mythos to achieve its goal. And it had a big mystery villain, which I am not going to spoil for you here, except that every edition of the collection of the Great Darkness Saga chooses to spoil the big villain right there on the cover, which is a problem. One of the advantages the Legion had, being 1,000 years separate from the rest of DC continuity, is that they were allowed to mix things up a bit. Consequences were allowed to happen. Characters were allowed to die. And okay, this is comic books, they did all come back eventually. But some of those deaths lasted quite a long while. When Pharaoh Lad sacrificed himself to stop the Sun Eater, that was something which continued for years before they eventually brought him back in a couple of different ways. Lightning Lad's death was less permanent, but even so, they were allowed to kill him off. But they did have one big continuity issue, which eventually they had to address. You see, in the early 80s, the mid-80s actually, DC had this line-wide reboot called Crisis on Infinite Earths, where they attempted to streamline their continuity to make more sense of it. And they made some executive choices about the backstories of some of their major characters, including that of Superman. And after Crisis, Superman was never Superboy. He didn't get his powers and his costume and his hero identity until he was a full adult. Which was a problem for the Legion, who was so embedded in being inspired by and having adventures with the young Superboy. This is something the writers had to address several times over. First of all, they created this idea of a pocket universe. Whenever the Legion went back in time, they went back to the pocket universe and met Superboy there. There was a slight problem with that because they also went back to modern day DC continuity and interacted with modern heroes, but they kind of glossed over that and didn't really think about it too much. Eventually, much later on, they replaced Superboy as the inspiration for the Legion with Mon-El, who was being called Valor at the time, but that again didn't stick because they retconned Mon-El's backstory as well at some point. In the modern Legion, the inspiration for the Legion is just the heroic age, letting them basically take the characters of whatever is the modern DC as the inspiration. Anyway, as I say, I missed most of that original drama. I didn't come back to the Legion until I was at university. Then I had a budget of my own to buy comic books, kind of, and I was living in a town which had its own comic book store at last. And as it happened, this coincided with the relaunch of the Legion book in an arc which is referred to as the 5 Years Later arc. It was the 90s. This new arc, this new Legion, was presented in a United Planets which was a lot grimier, a lot more conflicted, a lot darker, a lot more dangerous. But this was the 90s. This was happening to every book at the time. But this book presented itself as a mystery. It never came out and flat out told you what had happened in that 5-year gap. You had to kind of piece it together. You had to understand why the Legion had broken up and gone their separate ways, and you had to wait for them to come back. It wasn't, I think, until the end of the first year where they officially declared the Legion of Superheroes was back. And at the time, it was really a punch-the-air kind of moment for a long-term fan like me. And we didn't get the full story of what had happened in the 5-year gap for like 40 or 50 issues, 4 or 5 years of this book. At the time, the Legion was so popular, it even created a spin-off series called the Legionnaires, featuring a set of young clones of the Legion. Basically, the Legion by this point had aged up into adulthood, and this was the darker, grimmer, grittier version of the Legion. But people wanted stories of the young Legion as well, so they created a clone batch. I think the SW7 batch, if I remember. I haven't checked that. Might have been SW5. No, I think it was SW7 batch. And they told stories about this young, still optimistic, idealistic version of the heroes in this grim and gritty world. And it was a fine time to be a Legion fan, particularly if you liked the hero Tenzil Kem, also known as Matter Eater Lad. But such things never last in the comic book industry, and Legion popularity waned. After a very successful run, we got the Legion Lost storyline, which was itself actually really good, but I don't think it ever really quite got the fans back. Over the course of the years since, we've had a number of different reboots. Some have been absolutely fantastic, some have been a little bit weird. I've collected them all because I am a Legion fan. In particular, when the New 52 happened, which was another line-wide relaunch of the DC books, they did try and give the Legion 2 books again, the Legion of Superheroes set in the 30th century, and a second iteration of Legion Lost set in the 20th century, 21st century by then? Doesn't matter. But they never really knew what to do with it. They never really found its footing. They never really found its purpose. And they ended up meeting the Legion Lost team, meeting the Teen Titans, who were also lost their way a little bit in the New 52. And the whole thing was a bit of a mess, and it all eventually fell over. For the longest time, we didn't see any Legion stuff at all. And that was a very dark time. We have recently-ish had a reboot again, this time being written by Michael Bendis and starring the modern-day Superboy, who is actually the son of Superman, Jonathan Kent. The book looks fabulous. Don't get me wrong, the artwork in this book is amazing, but I'm not a huge fan of this iteration of the Legion. Bendis doesn't seem to be handling the huge cast very well. We get emphasis on Superboy, which is fine, but all of the rest seem to sort of vanish into the background, essentially. There has been a few hints of an ongoing storyline bringing things together, but the book goes so slowly, with such huge gaps between issues. I hadn't picked up an issue for probably half a year. I went back to go and look at how many issues I'd missed. One. Bendis is famous for long delays and missed deadlines for his books, and I'm afraid the Legion is suffering from that at the moment. Still looks very pretty though, and it is still a Legion book, so I do have to have a certain amount of faith in it. Because at the end of the day, the Legion has been rebooted many, many times. It has seen many iterations, good, bad, and indifferent, and it has always been something which I've come back to. So at the end of the day, the only thing to say essentially is, long live the Legion. Going to end this video with a very quick word about some of the things which I took from the Legion of Superheroes. Not as sort of plagiarism, of course, but inspiration that I took from the Legion to appear in the Ascension Machine. The setting, of course, a diverse galaxy with lots of different alien-type heroes in it. That is something which is shared by both. I was going to say that Star Wars also does a similar thing, but of course Star Wars isn't set in the future, it's set in the past. There was an academy for Legionnaires, for people who wanted to become a member of the Legion. They could go off to the Legion Academy and study there with a hope of eventually getting into the Legion proper. We didn't actually ever see much about the Legion Academy, so it's not really an inspiration for my book, apart from using the name Academy in the Justice Academy that I wrote about. There is one element, maybe, that might, it's not, if it is an inspiration, it's not a conscious one. There is a group within the world of the Legion of Superheroes called the Legion of Substitute Heroes. These are heroes who are not technically members of the greater hero community because they tried out for the Legion and failed for one reason or another. And in the comic book universe of the Legion of Superheroes, they decided to set up their own team who would be there as backup and help out where they could. And I guess Gray's group, while they aren't substitutes in any way, they are a sort of a misfit band of heroes within the within the Justice Academy, separate, apart from the main academy, I guess. And I suppose you could view Gray's team as an analogue of the subs if you really look for it. But as I say, it wasn't a conscious thing I was trying to do. Anyway, thank you very much. That's all I've got to say about the Legion of Superheroes for this time. I could have said so much more, but I'm going to restrain myself. So that's it from me on this occasion. Join me next week when it will be the second episode of my podcast reading of Improbable Cause. And join me next month when I'm going to talk about another one of my influences. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.